Velvet Goldmine is a film directed by Todd Haynes, which on the surface is a queer pastiche of Citizen Kane, focusing on the synthesis and death of glam rock, told in the form of a biopic. Though this isn't like biopics we see produced in Hollywood nowadays, such as Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man, in that it doesn't follow the story of a queer icon, rather it tackles the idea of the queer icon. Initially, this film was supposed to be a biopic of David Bowie, as the name would suggest, but due to creative differences, Bowie would no longer grant the producers the right to his image or music in the movie. This would later turn into a barrage of lawsuits, and after viewing the film, it's hard not to see why he would be critical of his own portrayal in the movie. The film opens with the line, "Although what you're about to see is a work of fiction, it should nevertheless be played at maximum volume." This is to highlight the fact that this movie isn't strictly grounded in reality. A lot of what it has to say is true. It also acts as a microcosm for the whole movie, in that it centres on the forged and farcical identities of these glam rockers to hide the shame that lies beneath. It also obviously acts as a warning that this movie might be a bit of a musical. The first character that we are introduced to is Oscar Wilde. Introduced as a boy who sticks out like a sore thumb, but flowered under the pressure. An important image at the start of the movie is that Oscar Wilde is implied to have been placed on this earth by aliens. The queer icon does generally have a similar experience to aliens. They are often rejected by society, but society can't help but be fascinated with them. Oscar Wilde has consistently been quoted throughout the whole movie, in a way in which he wouldn't notice, as it's deliberately not noted, only furthers his idea that queerness is eternal in its constant death and revival. An artist should create beautiful things, but should put nothing of his own life into them. He is mirrored with the character of Jack Fairy. There is a very poignant scene involving Jack to start the movie, which set the tone rather well.
But as long as he could remember, Jack Fairy knew better. Until one mysterious day, when Jack would discover that somewhere there were others, quite like him, singled out for a great gift. And one day, the whole stinking world would be theirs.
In his turmoil and shame, in rejection by traditional society, as represented by his bloodied lip, he carves queer identity by redirecting his abuse into beauty, and furthermore to cover his past trauma. He is heralded as being a true original throughout the rest of the movie, despite the fact he is clearly represented as a later iteration of Oscar Wilde. His shared lineage with Oscar Wilde is illustrated by their shared green brooch, which dominates every shot it's in with its bright and shiny luster, which mirrors their respective personas. The movie is very interesting in the ways it parallels real-life icons. Brian Slade is clearly meant to be David Bowie in that he is seen as the centre of glam rock and has distinct eras and looks as Bowie did. The character of Kurt Wilde is a lot more interesting in who he's supposed to represent. He shares his looks and first name with Kurt Cobain, which is further proven by the fact that Courtney Love pulled out from working on the movie as she claimed the character was too close to that of her late partner. His thin figure, locomotion and relationship with the character Brian Slade, who represents Bowie, can be compared to that of Iggy Pop. Bowie also shared relations that were put all over the tabloids with Mick Jagger, which is explored in the movie. Lastly, his true upbringing can be compared to that of Lou Reed, in that from a young age he was culturally and sexually explorative. This kind of behaviour wasn't accepted by his family, so they would send him to a camp to undergo shock therapy for his proclivities. The fact that one character can represent all these real icons over so many years and different movements further pushes the narrative of the ubiquity of the queer icon and how the mantle is passed down from generation to generation. Queer is defined by change. It's the forefront of societal development, and hence why the death of glam rock represents the continuation of queer culture. As discussed prior, there is a facade to these characters, with the authentic and fake often being confused, and in that a lot of authentic queerness can be lost and exploited. Slade, although a celebrity himself, is meant to further represent the queer fan and parody. He is contrasted with Jack Fairy in that he isn't a true original, rather he sculpts, or some might say steals, his identity from those around him. At what point does this stop being queer? Is queer from the self, and does it have to be authentic? Whatever that means. This also tackles the dissonance between the performative and the real self, which is shown to be a real problem for these icons, because they are more of an idea than a person. But it is also shown in Arthur's character and is expressed that the battle between the produced personality in order to fit in and the authentic is just reality for those that are queer. Shame is the most important theme in this movie, and it's equally as important in queer theory. One of the most significant scenes is where our protagonist, Arthur Stewart, is masturbating to images of Brian Slade in which he is caught by his parents. It's important to note why Arthur is masturbating though. It's not only from a point of attraction, but an almost narcissistic outburst. Much like Brian parodies others' personalities, so does Arthur. There's a scene before this one in which he points to the TV and states, "That's me," multiple times when seeing Brian Slade. The journey for queer people to find themselves is highlighted to be unapologetically narcissistic, partly because society shows them no love, so they have to find it somewhere, and in doing so, finding comfort in the self by parodying others is essential to develop. Arthur was still working through his shame, and this is shown to be a very familiar experience. A lot of the queer journey is separating yourself from shame. In 1972, David Bowie played a show that would be the death of Ziggy Stardust, which was a powerful icon for many. It helped resolve and work through a lot of sexual confusion and frustration. At the concert, it is reported that people started to strip and masturbate. This is slightly referenced in the movie, but this idea of shame and redirection of it is a key theme. The discourse of public shame has been going on for millennia, as far back as Diogenes the Cynic. As his name would suggest, he would be critical of many of societal norms, and one of the most iconic ways in which he rejected ideas was his living without shame, and in no way was this shown more than when he publicly masturbated. This movie has been compared to Citizen Kane in the way that the story is structured. Citizen Kane uses triangle investigation and intrigue in order to slowly reveal the enigma that is Kane, while Velvet Goldmine uses a similar system, though may I add not as well, as to reveal the secrets of the disappearance of Brian Slade. This reimagining of one of cinema's most beloved films further pushes the narrative of the fact that this movie is one large pastiche of pop culture and a meta-study of how it parodies itself, and in doing so, the concept of queer culture is made. It also borrows non-chronological and non-linear storytelling from Citizen Kane, which leads it to be more of a character study than a strict traditional story. Todd Haynes was also equally inspired by A Clockwork Orange and queer culture in itself, where the clothing choices and the colour of clothes that they wore were supposed to act as a direct reflection of their inner psychological and emotional states. Whereas conventionally, clothing is used as a tool to indicate one's socio-economic status, here it is merely from the self. Queerness is portrayed as some kind of superpower in Velvet Goldmine, but instead of falling into a radioactive vat to gain the powers, you must go through shame. The film explores all the forms that queerness can take and where it ends. It is seen as the forefront of culture despite being rejected by the general public, and equally it fascinates and captivates them. It's a concept triggered and grounded in shame, and is grown in parody and pastiche. Queerness is also most visible in its death, because once something becomes no longer taboo or different, it is no longer the queer it once was. Ultimately, it goes against our general understanding of queer being a unique experience, with each character encapsulating an aspect of queer culture. I think all queer people can somewhat relate to the character of Arthur and understand the struggle of his icons. This feels largely an attack on Bowie, with how the characters of Brian Slade is portrayed, but I think is facing a bigger problem than that. It also seems to hint at the disconnect with queer theory and other ideology, such as Marxist theory. In many pieces of media, and also true in real life, that queerness seems to be treated as a commodity that can be sold, and in this it has been somewhat aligned with capitalism. Furthermore, queer theory centres on individual identity, and this leads to it being grounded in identity politics, which is at odds with a lot of modern day leftist thinking, and most importantly Marxism. However, it's unsurprisingly very critical of the capitalist machine that exploits it, in that the construction of gender is reinforced by the science that is funded by the ruling class, which the idea of queerness wishes to oppose.
Hey. Make a wish.
This is the ending scene to the movie. It's a cyclical ending, with the ship that initially brought Oscar Wilde to Earth in the beginning coming back to view Arthur's queer apotheosis. Arthur has finally become the man he wanted to be in Brian Slade by getting with Kurt Wilde, which highlights the importance of parody once again, which is only furthered by the presence of the ship, which is supposed to represent the beginning of queerness in this movie. Queerness never ends, it is constantly reborn,